Lauren Schwisow. I was born in a little town of, or in rural Nebraska, Daykin, Nebraska. And my parents were farmers, lived on a farm. My dad was a farmer. And went to rural school, and one of the things that I remember about my childhood was, A, the fact we were in a depression. We were all depression kids. And B, since we were on the farm, we also suffered from the terrible drought that was around in the 30s, and so we had a double whammy, really. But nevertheless, everyone was poor, and so it wasn't. We had enough to eat. We lived on the farm, and consequently, we really didn't know that we were as poor as we were. It's kind of a relative matter. And I did graduate from high school, a little high school of 25 in my class, and then I started Nebraska Wesleyan University in Lincoln, Nebraska. Spent a couple of years at Nebraska Wesleyan, and of course during that time the the bombing of Pearl Harbor took place, and in order to keep away from, or not to be drafted, I did enlist. And I remember in the fall of 1942 listening to the pitches made by the Army Air Force, or Army Air Corps at that time, and also the naval people, and decided that I didn't want to try to land on a carrier, and so I opted for the Army Air Force. Did my basic training was in Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, in the winter of 1943, and it was very cold and not a very good place. But from there I went to McAllister College, which was, there's a name for the program. It's prior to pre-flight. It was kind of a refresher, college refresher course, and went through that program at McAllister, and then went out to Santa Ana, where I went into pre-flight. And my training, then I got through Santa Ana, and went to, my primary training was in Dos Palos, California, and my next step along the way was at Bakersfield, California. And then I went to Twin Engine School at Douglas, Arizona, where I graduated, class of 44C. I was assigned to, I had hoped to fly B-25s, a B-25 bomber, but at that stage of the war, we were losing so many pilots because of the daylight missions that they never ever considered me for a B-25, so I was given the assignment to fly in a B-24, and so I ended up as co-pilot. Had my crew assignment in Lincoln, Nebraska, did my B-24 training in Boise, Idaho, and on the 4th of July, 1944, I was home, and my parents in Nebraska celebrated 4th of July, and that meant, of course, fried chicken and apple pie and everything, a great big feast. And then, as it turned out, the 21st of July, I was shot down. So I went from feast to famine in a matter of about 21 days, something like that. Anyway, I did fly, took a new airplane from Topeka over to Italy, and on my very first mission I was shot down on a bombing run to Linz, Austria, which was, needless to say, quite a rude awakening. All kinds of emotions were a part of that first mission. I would have to, well, I have to go back just a minute and say we were near the target, and we were bounced by a number of fighters and set a fire, and so it became very obvious that the best thing to do would be to leave the airplane, which I did. And I landed in a meadow in Austria, near Linz, near our target. And after I cleared my head, I stood up and I heard some guy off to my right shout. It was an old fellow with a gun and took a shot at me. And he either missed because he was not a good shot, or he did it because it was just a warning shot. There's a tree line off to my left about 30 yards. The cover in the meadow was about 15 inches. And so I decided, as happened with so many airmen, they're captured singularly. I mean, they are the only ones usually involved in the capture, which is much different from the capture of prisoners at Bataan, Corregidor, Battle of the Bulge, and some of those other big engagements, because there it's lots of times groups of individuals. Anyway, captured by the Germans or by the Home Guard, probably Austrian, and was taken to a searchlight, to a facility right next to a searchlight battery, because I had landed pretty close to the searchlight when I came down. And there was another enlisted man from another crew that came in, and we were in this little building for a while, and then they took us in a truck, and we went around the countryside. They very slowly took us through a number of small villages, and people were both glad and angry, I guess. They were glad that we were shot down, and they were angry at us because of all the destruction that we'd rained down on the. But certainly we're innocent people. But fortunately, we were still under the control of the Home Guard, and so we were taken to a big camp, a prison camp with big, high stone walls, and sat in this, booted into this camp, and then sat along the wall. And this other innocent men and myself were there for a while, and then eventually more airmen were brought in and so forth, until late in the evening, when it was near dusk. We were about 35 or 40, all who had been shot down on the Linz raid. And then we were taken in a building that had a central corridor and had cells off on either side, and we spent a couple of, I think it was 3 days and 2 nights in this facility. I knew it was a concentration camp because I had learned or had seen in newsreels the kind of, well, certainly the clothing that people in concentration camp were wearing, and so that's the kind of clothing that these people were wearing. And I also saw one barracks of women that were housed. But I didn't know the name of this camp, and it wasn't until 1988 that I was in Jerusalem, and I went to the Holocaust Museum, and there I saw the listing of all of the concentration camps that were on a big map. And I found out that the concentration camp's name was Mauthausen. In 1990, I was going to Oberammergau, and from where we were in Munich and to where we were going, I found out that we could make a slight deviation, and we go right by Mauthausen. So this was an unscheduled stop, but in 1990 I visited Mauthausen. I went to the camp, still there, the walls are still there. It's now a museum, and they have a 30-minute tape in English telling about the camp itself. So that was an experience with mixed emotions. I'll finish up this part of the story. I'm going this summer in about 2 weeks. I'm going back to over Ammergau, and this time Mauthausen is scheduled as a stop. But in the interim, I have now learned, I have corresponded with an Austrian who is the historian for the bomb group that I was flying with, and who is the expert on the raid, on the Linz raid, because he was a child. He was 9 years old when the raid took place. And he tells about going to their shelter, and the bombs falling and so forth. And so I'm scheduled to meet with him in Mauthausen on June the 30th this year. So I'm looking forward to that, and he also sent me a map showing where my airplane landed, which was, we parted company. I had no idea where it landed at all. Because I was more interested in just getting out of the airplane and getting down to the earth. Anyway, that kind of completes that whole segment of the story. From Mauthausen, I was, and the other Allied prisoners were taken to the interrogation center at Wexler. And when I went into the cell, which was probably about 8 by 6, something like that, I saw a number of markings on the wall. There were 4 markings, and then a crosshatch like a person would do to indicate the number of days. And that was repeated several times, so I thought I probably would have a stay of at least 5 or 6 days in the concentration camp, or in this interrogation center. But as it turns out, I was a second lieutenant on my first mission. The Germans knew more about me than I knew about the group. I didn't have any information, and so it became quite evident after the first session that they really didn't want to spend their time with me. And so I only spent one night, I think, in the concentration camp. Went to Dulag and eventually to Stalag I, and ended up in the same room with Elmer. That part of the story you have a pretty good idea of, because you know what Elmer's, I'm sure, has already indicated the various things that happened at the camp. After Barth, after Stalag I went home and finished up this time at the University of Nebraska. And I completed my teaching credential, and so I became a teacher and a coach, and went to a school system in the northwest part of Nebraska, Scotts Bluff, you probably know, and spent 16 years there, and ended up as coach and a teacher and administrator. And in the interim, I also went back to university and got a couple more degrees. So I ended up as superintendent of schools, president of the college. They had a 2-year junior college connected with the school system. And so I had the whole ball of wax, and stayed there, as I say, for 16 years. And then I moved to one other place, and that was Hinsdale, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, as assistant superintendent. And I spent 24 years there, and then retired and moved to Olympia, Washington. I have my wife is still with me. We were married at Boise when I was in B-24 training there. And so we've been married 56 years. I have 2 children, both adopted. My daughter is a mental health therapist and has her own private practice. And my son is, well, I should say was, an opera singer and spent 20 years singing in the United States and England, France, Italy, and then decided that he got tired of living out of a suitcase, and he wasn't staying around long enough to establish a relationship with the opposite sex, so he gave it up. And in the interim, we had moved to Olympia, Washington to be near my daughter, and so he moved out there too. And it wasn't too long that he got married, and then shortly thereafter he had twin boys, and then they had a daughter. And in the meantime, when this all was taking place, his wife had applied for veterinary school in Pullman, Washington State University, and was admitted, but she was, of course, pregnant for a number of years, and the boys were also premature, and so they spent a couple months in intensive care. All of that meant that she got a little late start in getting to Pullman. However, she did finally go, and Jim, my son, is stay-at-home dad and takes care of the kids, and she's now in her 4th year, starting her 4th year in veterinary school. This past year has been a very interesting one for me. I was the commander of the American Ex-Prisoners of War, State of Washington, and we have 11 chapters, and I went around and visited every chapter. I had a number of speaking engagements, and I enjoyed that aspect very much. I enjoyed talking about helping people understand prisoners of war, helping to bring that message before them, and so it's been a very rewarding year. And this coming here to Jackson's kind of as a culmination of my experiences as a part of prisoners of war.
Say, I wonder if you could tell us, Lauren, what you think of the world as we look ahead. And, I mean, you've had a dealings now with the young people for 50 years. You could compare young people today with young people 50 years ago, and then how will they fit in, or what's wrong or what's good about it?
Well, the world has certainly changed, but I'm not pessimistic. I'm optimistic about the country and the young people. In our area, we are finding a much greater interest in the past, in what's happened in World War II, and the part that, as Brokaw said, the greatest generation, the part the greatest generation played in securing the freedom of country. I know that the whole era of computers and internet and electronics, which I certainly don't understand, but my grandson seems to understand very well, and that's going to be part of the future. But I still think that I'm still optimistic that they will be good citizens and will take their place in the world, and will assume the responsibility that needs to be assumed to have this country to continue to be great.
Since you left the service, I should say maybe got out of World War II, how do you feel the VA and the federal government in the states have treated you as an individual and as your family?
Well, when I lived in Illinois, I really, go back I'll go back one more step, and that is, I think I was like many of the World War II veterans after the war. We were interested in coming back If we weren't married, getting married. If we were married, establishing a family and getting a job and getting on with our life. And so I think that that happened. And so consequently, I didn't pay a heck of a lot of attention to the VA, and I didn't belong to prisoner of war organizations in Illinois. I just wasn't motivated to do that. However, when I went to the state of Washington, we have a very strong and very good Veterans Administration, and we have a very active group of people involved in the prisoner of war organization. And so I can say without any question that I've been treated very well. I've gone through my protocol examinations. The last doctor gave me probably the best examination that I have ever had by any medical person. And my year as commander brought me in contact with many people in the VA and related areas, health areas, all having an interest in veterans, and specifically prisoners of war, treated very well. And I think we have an outstanding VA in the state of Washington. And just recently, as part of our state convention, which I helped to put on in Olympia, we had a couple of 2-hour sessions devoted to the automated record system that's been developed in our area. And so I think the VA has done a very fine job, and I have nothing but praise. This would not be true, I'm sure, if I were in some other state. But in the state of Washington, I'd say it's great.
The chestnut trees, the wishing well, I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be